Kia ora, ni hao, and hello. Welcome to the Cherry Journal podcast. I'm your host, Camille Yang. Today, I'm excited to welcome MJDorian, the creative force behind one of my favorite shows, Creative Codex. He's not just a podcaster, but also a talented artist and composer. In this episode, we explore the making of Creative Codex, discuss how Carl Jung has shaped many creative journeys. We also talk about the fascinating minds featured in his shows, such as William Blake, Nikola Tesla, Kurt Cobain, and many more. Let's dive in. Welcome, MJDorian. I think I mentioned to you I listened almost every episode of your show.
Thank you, Camilla, and thank you for inviting me on your show. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. I know it's going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I first found you from the Third Eye Drop podcast. Michael interviewed you on his show, then I found you, then I said, wow, everything you talk about is on my interest, especially Carl Jung. And I listened to, I think early, back to 2018. Is that right?
Yeah, 2018 was when it started. It's true.
So how did you start your show and what motivates you to do that?
Right. I mean, I would say I was in a kind of transitional point in my life, creatively, interestingly enough, where I had been doing film scoring for about a decade out of college. That became kind of my career. But I'd always been passionate about learning these ideas about how does creative genius work, where does creativity
Mm,
come from, how important obviously it is to humankind and everything. And as I had my career going, which was going well, I also had these other inclinations, one of them being to work on pop music and create this pop music
mm,
album. And so I ended up kind of pivoting, because creatively, I found that at the time in film music, I wasn't being satisfied creatively.
mm,
The projects that I was being hired for, at least at the time, might be a little different now. They wanted very minimal things musically. They
mm,
like, God forbid you tried to write a melody somewhere that was on a clarinet or something, or use an orchestra,
mhm,
which is my part of my passion. And so what ended up happening is it was organic enough that this podcast ended up being this kind of avenue for me to explore some creative things like writing music for the episodes,
mm.
which I still
Yeah.
do. After 6 years, every episode that is one of these major long form narratives, I write new music for at least a few key scenes. And that's one of my passions. And so it became a creative outlet, but also an outlet for one of these very early and deep curiosities that I had about the creative mind and
Mm,
why once in a generation does a figure come along almost in every medium and
mhm.
kind of reinvent how we see the world. And so that's been a long-standing passion and still is. Yeah, and I think it informs the work.
Yeah. So how has Carl Jung's work influenced your own creative process?
Sure. Yeah, there's this other passion that has to do certainly with Dr. Carl Jung's work and his theories
Mm,
and analytical psychology. I've always had an interest in psychology, but uh, this this moment that I stumbled on Jung, it was kind of like a revelation as an artist, because what ends up happening is that in Jung, you end up being given a framework with which to understand
mm,
creativity, because it very much Carl Jung himself was a creative, but his framework very much helps explain a lot of the inclinations and compulsions of
mm,
artists, the origin point of artworks, why artists feel like they need to create this painting, and then of course then the symbolism of the painting or the artwork itself, and Jung's
mm,
framework helps explain those things in very logical ways, actually, despite people maybe picking apart some elements of his theories as being unscientific and things like this. So I found great value in it. But as far as how does it inform, my own creative process, I would say I try not to let it um, influence me too much in my own creativity.
Mm.
It's more an analytical tool, I would say, after the fact, and
Mm-hmm.
also helps me understand other artists' works, basically. Because when you're in the
Yeah.
process of creating something, you don't want a formula to guide your work. It's
Mm.
like
True.
if a movie script was written by committee, and there was those check boxes, and
Mm.
this person said, well, we got to make sure we check off that box, and this person, wait, no, we got to rewrite this scene, even though at first it seemed really brilliant, but we didn't check off this other box. And so there's a danger in that. As
Mm.
powerful as his theories are, if you become taken by this kind of romantic way of seeing them, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself and then make your art predictable. you know I think that's one of the things that I see it as an analytical tool, but not so much in a way of trying to limit
Mm.
my own processes.
Yeah. So before I read the Red Book, I didn't realize how Carl Jung is an artist. Because
Yeah,
when you see all these
right.
paintings, oh wow. Yeah. So like wow, amazed by that. And I think Carl Jung also helped me to face my dark side. Because a lot of
Mm,
times when my shadow there, I'm too afraid to touch it. But now
mm,
I kind of learning I can turn this kind of dark energy to my creative power as well.
right, right. And there's tremendous
Yeah.
power in those, what we label as dark sides, or just the unseen aspects of our personality, of our psyche, because they're not always negative, though maybe they often are. And there's tremendous creative potential there, because one of the ways, I think, of first engaging the unconscious and those parts of yourself
Mm.
that are hidden is through creative work. Whether it's creative writing, whether it's journaling, whether it's creating a painting, drawing, writing a song, writing poetry, music. All those things have the potential to kind of draw out these
True.
unseen aspects of ourselves and recognize those aspects of ourselves, as long as we respect what might be coming out and don't judge it too harshly.
Yeah, when I listen to you reading the Red Book, because there are so many audiobook about that, other people reading it, but I didn't feel very attracted to that. But for your one, yeah, I was like, wow, it's amazing with the music, and you also invited other artists to do the other
Right.
characters' voice. I wonder, yeah, can you describe more about the process of you creating the reading for the Red Book? And I know you are doing a new one, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's two, I guess, tracks of my experiences working with the Red Book. There's the initial episodes I did about it, which I believe are episodes 11 and 12 in my show Creative Codex, my podcast. And there I did do, these long form readings of the book in between analyzing them. And part of what I saw was the great potential in them, is that they were very cinematic in quality, which is uh, an exceptional detail there, because he wrote these and he had these experiences in 1913 into 1914, and this was before movies.
Hmm.
So you can't say he had just watched a Marvel movie and he was really into it, and he sat down and had a meditation, and
Yeah.
then he met death on a cliff as this tornado of bodies was spinning in front of him. And it's like, no, these are all just aspects of the human mind at work here, and you could argue the soul that he's interacting with. And so, because I saw those things, and they startled me, I was like, this is perfect for dramatizing just a little bit, just to add a little more emotion, putting some music under it, adding sound design to some of these very descriptive elements of the environment. And so in those original episodes, I did that, and people responded to it incredibly well. I was very surprised by the response, because at the time I didn't know that there was this whole subculture of Jungians and Jungian enthusiasts. I was just doing it because I really enjoyed it. And since then, there's continues to be very much, I see, a demand for that kind of approach to the Red Book. And so on my Patreon, every month I do a reading of a passage, or specifically a chapter. And then I add original music where appropriate, and continue to do the sound design as well. And occasionally, for certain characters, call on someone to kind of provide a little more of like a dynamic quality of a different voice.
Yeah. And I noticed that the William Blake one is coming up soon.
Oh yeah, it just got released today, actually. Yeah,
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
just put the finishing stamp on it last night, and out the door it went. And so people have been very much demanding that
Yes.
I cover William Blake, and I was like, fine, all right. And it's proving to be a wonderful challenge, and it's teaching me a lot also about the way he viewed the world.
Speaking of William Blake, I watched his exhibition when I was living in London.
Oh, no way. Yeah.
And yeah, it's back to
Maybe in Tate?
2019.
Was it in the Tate or
Yeah,
something? Yeah,
in Tate.
One.
Yeah. Did you go?
No, I just know that it was one of his major exhibitions was in Tate, but I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so that was the first time I heard about William Blake. Yeah,
Mm.
before I was so ignorant. But after watching that exhibition, I was like, wow, mind blowing. And interestingly enough, last year I was in Germany, and I have no idea what happened. I was very sober and I'm not on drug, but I saw William Blake's famous painting
Whoa.
on the sky, and I couldn't move at that time. I was just kneel down. Then when I look up, I saw that I forgot the name of that painting. It's like a god put the finger like that.
Yes, like he's putting his fingers out, and there's a compass that
Yeah.
draws down from the sky. Yeah, it's called The Ancient of Days.
Oh yeah, that's
I,
true. Yeah.
I want to know more about your what sounded like a visionary experience, but
Yeah.
it's a wonderful synchronicity, because the episode I just released has that image as its cover art.
Wow, cool. Amazing.
That's very nice. So what was this that you experienced? You said you froze and you saw it in the sky?
So back to the story. So I went to Leipzig, and the reason I went there because Nietzsche was teaching there. I'm a big Nietzsche fan, so I went there just to want to do some research. But when I was walking around the campus of University of Leipzig, I saw someone look exactly like Nietzsche walking towards me. Then that's the time I froze. I have no idea. I couldn't move because when I see the person walking towards me, I want to give him a hug. Then I start to cry. I have no idea.
Wow.
I think my mind is just like my imagination is going too much. Yeah, that's a very scary moment. Like I froze, I couldn't move, and then I just feel like I need to kneel down and look up the sky. That's when I saw William Blake's image there. I have no idea how long it went. I feel like it went like hours, but it's only like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, whoa. Yeah,
Whoa,
that
that's
scared
really
me
fascinating.
for a while. But yeah, last year was a lot of this kind of supernatural experience I couldn't explain. But yeah, after like listen to your podcast and other people's podcasts or do some readings, I feel like it's not that abnormal. A lot of people experience the similar stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So the other thing about those kinds of experiences is that it kind of shakes your sense of reality, where you start to open up a bit, right? Where you start to you either end up having a mental breakdown, or you end up having kind of this spiritual opening, where your mind opens to other possibilities, and maybe that are, and this is the way that Blake describes it. He calls it the abyss of the five senses. The potential that these five senses limit our and constrain our consciousness, and in those kinds of moments, something breaks or opens up, and you end up seeing, something more filled with splendor and a visionary experience and something unexplainable. And yeah, those are really valuable moments, I think.
Yeah, it reminds me of Nikola Tesla's one sentence, one quote. He said, "If you want to know the secret of universe, think about vibration, frequency, or I forgot the other one because you did the Nikola Tesla's episode,
Yeah.
and I was wondering, what's your take on his paradox of his genius? Because a lot of people think he's crazy, and how do you think his unique approach to invention and creativity can inspire the artist today?
Right. No, I mean, you start to when you study these kinds of figures, as I have for these 6 years, and you study them very closely, and you understand their lives and their contexts, and you even read their journals, which I think is and their correspondences, which is the most
Mhm.
useful. You start to see that one of the traits of a creative genius is to be an outlier in their society, is to be an individual, and very much like there's a staunch individualism about them that they have accepted their role as a weirdo because in a way their use in society, that they're more useful to society when they're a weirdo, when they're
Mm.
confident in that strangeness, because it allows them to see everything fresh. It allows them to see everything without the biases that we tend to view the world in, and the limits, the constraints. So someone like a Nikola Tesla, uh, not only was he an immigrant to the United States, but he already before
Mm.
that was viewing the world in a very, very startlingly different way. He was already questioning his teachers in college, and saying that he would improve upon the direct current motor of the time, which was the dominant form of electricity. And of course, his
Mm.
teachers, pushed him aside, and said that that's crazy. Nobody can improve on it. It's already a perfect system. And then before he even came to the States, he had already had a visionary moment while he was on the beach with a
Mm.
friend. And after having tried to toil over this problem of what an alternating current motor would look like for a number of years, in a very focused way, it came to him in a flash, and it kind of appeared to him in its perfect form, and he was able to visualize its ins and outs, and how it would function. And then he took a stick and he drew it on the sand with his friend there observing. And he
Mm.
said, "This is it. This is the alternating current motor that will change the world." And then after that, of course, once he was able to get the funding and support for it, it did. But it this is one of the things you learned from someone like a Nikola Tesla, and all of these figures, that they embrace their role as an outsider. That comes with certain difficulties, of course, um, but it allows them to have insights and views of the world that other people
Mm.
can't.
Have you also come across this feeling of being an outsider? Can you share some stories?
I mean, sure, there's a wonderful quote I only recently heard from a
Mm.
filmmaker, Jonas Mikas, and he said, "For an artist, it is a disaster to be normal." And
I
it
agree.
it immediately makes me smile. When I first read it, it made me smile because that certainly was my experience. Even growing up, I was one, an immigrant, to the United States, so I already had accepted my role as being slightly outside, having to pick up
Mm.
English from kindergarten, and being made fun of for my name. And these aren't huge deals, but they
Mm.
leave a mark. They force you to accept a certain position from an early age. And then approaching high school, I started doing a lot of drawing and visual art. And so um, I thought that it would be better for me to pursue that track rather than just to go to my local high school, because my brother went to his local high school, our local high school at the time,
Mm.
and it wasn't working out for him. He just was not fitting in
Mm.
very well. And so my parents had the insight of mind to accept this possibility, and then ended up going to an art high school in Manhattan called the High
Mm.
School of Art and Design. And that place was just filled with misfits. It was
Cool.
all those students, in their local high schools would be like the weirdos and the
Mm.
outcasts, because they would be like the artsy kid in the corner drawing during class. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I accepted that role kind of organically from an early age, and you know, I still embrace it. I try to.
Yeah, I see a lot of artists, if you trace back to their original stories, they all find their talent when they were very little. Yeah, like Alexander McQueen. Yeah, you did a series of his story. Before I just think, oh, he's a very unique designer. But once I know how his upbringings and how he made his way to become the most famous designer in the world, yeah, it's a very touching story.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing story, and there are, a lot of examples of people finding their talent early on, but there's also quite a few very notable ones of people starting kind of late or in their teenage years, just to give hope to those people out there who
Yeah,
maybe
true.
are like,
Yeah.
well, it's too late for me. Jimi Hendrix, for one example, one of the
Yeah.
greatest guitarists of all time. I say that personally as a guitarist myself.
Mm,
He only picked up the guitar at around the age of 14 or 15. That was when he got his first guitar. Before that, the only thing with his experiences with music were he played flute in school. Like, that's it. And within that span, he died at 27. Within that span of just 12, 13 years, he was the greatest guitarist
hmm
alive, without a doubt. For anybody that, viewed him in concert, from, Paul McCartney to Eric Clapton being in his concerts, they were like, this guy is
mm,
just on a different planet. And it just goes to show you, there are instances where people discover an early talent, but there are also just as many, like in the case of Vincent van Gogh, they go through life, living how they can live, and then they kind of stumble on something, and uh, they kind of pull up a route, and that route leads them to just this entire, like, this vein of gold in the earth, that is this hidden talent of theirs, or propensity, or potential for an enormous talent that they didn't know they had.
mm.
And I think that can happen a lot too.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think when I was little, I'm super passionate about drawing. My mom still keep a lot of drawing of me. Yeah, when I was like 5 or 6, I always draw a lonely person
Just lonely, just one
sitting in the
person.
nature. Yeah,
Oh,
just one person. I play music or writing something in the nature.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, oh, I was such a little kid. How did I know like why I didn't draw like a house or tree or flower like the other
Mm,
childrens do? So yeah, now I look back, I found interesting. I don't know what that mean, but just finding
yeah.
interesting. I like this solitude.
That is interesting. That's unique. I, for one, remember drawing a lot of violence, a lot of, when I was in like junior high and such, a lot of body parts exploding, people beating each other up, blood flying all over the place. It was, at the time, just whatever, I guess, attracted me. But I was also drawing, anatomy, and people and
hmm
such. But something about physical violence was I was drawn to that. Um, so yeah, everybody's just, yeah, curious about these things.
Yeah. Have you analyzed why you draw that? Do you figure out what it is, or it doesn't matter that much?
I don't know. I think there is naturally an inclination in children,
Mm,
um, to explore those darker aspects of life, especially when they aren't confronting them in their day to day. There's, of course, you could argue the instances of somebody, who's in a horrible situation in their home life, and
mm,
being abused, and or seeing those kinds of things happening to someone they love, and then they express it in art. But in other instances, like, I could say, just watching my daughter, who's going
mm,
to be 10 soon, there was a point in time about last year where she started drawing, like, a lady who was like a ghost lady, and she was covered in bleeding wounds, and she was
mm,
holding a knife, and then there was like a dead body next to her, like, that was bleeding out.
mm.
And she would like routinely draw this. And as an artist myself,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's really crazy. She must be just exploring this
Mm,
as kind of a new and edgy kind of dark thing. And then, of course, had to talk about it with some people, and they were like, "Oh yeah, just around that age, some kids just start to become interested in these darker subjects." And it was true. Like a friend of hers in the schoolyard would show her like a crazy gory picture that she drew, and then they would share, "Oh, look at the one I drew,"
Yeah.
and so you could see it happening that way.
Yeah, interesting. I just it reminds me of a couple of short stories I wrote while me in primary school about
Hmm.
10 or 11 years old. I wrote a lot of murder
Oh
stories,
yeah.
and
See.
funny enough, my like language teacher, she thought, oh, you got some talent in writing, so she helped me to publish those
Mm,
stories. So now you can see, okay, oh wow, yeah, children in that age can be very dark. Yeah, and I have no idea where does all those thoughts come from.
right.
Maybe from TV or newspaper, but it still amazed me like why I got that idea in that age.
Right. I think it's a curiosity about, oh, so the morbid side of life. It kind of comes with its negative associations. But the further in time you look, even as recently as the 1800s,
Mm.
death was a very near and present part of everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
People would be dying from illnesses constantly that you knew, and you'd see it around you. Whether it's just a loved one that recently passed, and we weren't as shielded from
Mm.
death as we are now, and decay as we are now.
You mentioned Jimi Hendrix died in 27 years old, and the recent episode you did with Kurt Cobain also joined the 27th club.
The 27 Club, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
prestigious.
I
Apparently very
know
famous and prestigious club. Yeah.
it is.
Jim
Yeah,
Morrison. Yeah. Even
Amy Winehouse.
Amy
Yeah.
Winehouse, Basquiat, very close to 27, around
Mm,
20, I think just turned 28 around the time. But yeah, it's a strange thing. It's almost like there's a certain point that you push the human body to an extreme around that time, and it's around that age that it just gives out, and either
mm.
psychologically or physically the body just gives up and says, that's it, I can't take it anymore, and something turns.
When I was in my 27s, I had two panic attacks. I thought, oh, I'm going to join the club.
Mm.
It's wonderful. Although I
Oh no.
didn't do any famous work yet. But yeah, it's just my, like, my mind is just making the stories. I think around that age, I would visit Seattle to see Kurt Cobain, the Nirvana's museum.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
What's your opinion about him? Because his lyric is very interesting. And when I watched his documentary, when I saw all his notes and journals, yeah, I found there's a lot of symbolism and personal references in his lyrics. I wonder what was your interpretation of those things from his creative process?
Yeah, I mean, everything about his musicianship I find completely fascinating,
Mm,
and uh, his lyrics are just stunningly original. He had definitely a taste for kind of a morbid twist in certain phrasing, using these contrasts of affection and love with like death and decay kind of contrast, or illness. And he he definitely what didn't shy away from obviously the darker emotions and twists in the lyrics and stuff like that, but also his sense of melody was completely his own. And I in that series that I did on him on my Patreon, I go through a number of his songs and I
mm,
analyze them, where you have the chords on the piano and then you play the melody against them. And to be able to like logically create a melody that doesn't match up with the chords in the same key, or that uses uh, what
mm,
would technically be very advanced concepts in music theory, just shows that he had a very innate and highly developed sense for his melodies. And I would go so far as to say he was one of the greatest melody writers in rock music, because some of them are just so haunting. I mean, even
mm-hmm,
in famous songs like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," if you just isolate the melody by itself, because we're so used to
mm,
hearing it, and hear the chords against it, it's just
mm,
such a perfect balance of like tension and release in the notes he's jumping to versus the chords on the bottom. And it's genius. It really is. And so there's a lot in there that one can dig into and explore. In some ways, because the songs are so ubiquitous, we have to kind of set
Mm,
aside our familiarity with them and kind of try to look at them anew, like just isolate the lyrics by themselves and see what value you can find in them, or isolate the melodies and things like
yeah.
that.
Do you consider him as a tragic figure? Because for me, I always want to, yeah, if I could write something very satisfied, I could die next minute. So I always feel like, yeah, Kurt Cobain, yeah, his life is a legend. I didn't feel sad for his gone, because when I was in Guns N' Roses concert, when I saw Axel become very big and his voice is broken, I feel like, oh God, why you still like doing that?
Right.
Is not even reach the average standard. I just feel sad when I saw artists, especially very well-known artists, become like
Mm,
decaying.
right. There's like the slow
Yeah.
fade. Yeah, I mean it's tough. It's tough as a singer, especially because you have a living instrument, and that instrument, inside of your body, your vocal cords, your throat, is affected by every single thing you do in your day-to-day life. And then on top of that,
Hmm.
it's affected by something you can't control, which is just age. And as you get older, your voice starts to get lower in pitch.
Mm.
And these are one of the struggles of singers. And no matter how good of a singer you are, there will come a point in time where you realize you're not
Yeah.
as good as you used to be, and you can't go back there. And that's a depressing moment, of course,
Yeah.
because you can't get a new instrument. It's not like you're a violinist and your instrument is um, crap now, and you can just go spend a good amount of money on a new one. Uh, so I completely understand that.
Mm.
Something like that happened with Chris Cornell as well, the singer of Soundgarden. And you could tell in the last few
Mm.
years of his life, his voice just wasn't there anymore, and he committed suicide. Uh, Unfortunately, took his own life, but um, I'm sure there were other factors, obviously. But these are the weird things that one
Mm.
faces as a vocalist, basically, right?
Yeah. Before, when I heard Hemingway killed himself, I feel like how a writer wrote Old Man and the Sea, like has such a resilience, will kill himself. I couldn't understand. But later, like just as you said, you probably lost the ability to be the like peak self. But when you lost that, you probably feel the difference, and you couldn't stand for it.
I mean, yeah, from the outside, there's definitely this strange romanticism to death and to somebody taking their own life, right? It's a powerful narrative because it immediately paints the person as almost like a tragic hero in our mind.
Mm.
And we're very taken by these narratives, when we read them, when we see them playing out before us. And the more brilliant somebody is, then when they take their own life tragically, the it's almost like the more we love them or feel the need to
Hmm.
hold them to that much higher of a regard, because there's something in that tragedy that um, crystallizes them in a very strange way. And I don't know if that's a healthy thing.
No.
Because everybody has more work to give. I mean, Kurt Cobain, even just give us another 10 years, man. I mean, this guy was so
Mm.
untouchable at that point in his career. Alexander McQueen, just give us 50 more years. You got it in you. He was still brilliant up to the last year. His Both of those people, you know, were serious drug addiction issues that really complicated
Mm.
things. So on top of clinical depression and emotional issues that require very deep therapy, they're also wrestling with very serious addictions. I
Mm.
hesitate to encourage the romanticization of someone taking their life, because it's true, though we do it, but all of these figures, I lament the works that they still had to give people.
Yeah. So based on all the series you did with the artists for for their creative progress, so what's the advice you will give artists who are facing some dark moment, like they feel like they couldn't do more and they couldn't reach the level they want?
Now, are you talking about that they couldn't? I'm just trying to figure out the specific framing. So you mean that there's a personal emotional struggle going on in their lives, or that there's something in their chosen field of art that they feel like they'll never attain that kind of success again,
Yeah, we can.
that kind of thing?
Yeah, answer this two part. Yeah, I'm very interested in these two part. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, often one leads to the other. It's like when you start to feel like you're fading in a
Mm,
sense. Maybe you fall into a depression, and then you try to cope with that depression with alcohol or with substance abuse. Uh, Certainly these kinds of things
mm,
have been shown to happen to a lot of people. But in terms of the idea of like an artist maybe achieving something early on, which happens, and then feeling that
mm,
they're always haunted by that, that definitely happens too. And the thing to remember is that there's a flux to life, and there's the ups and downs of people's
mm,
interest in your work and disinterest in your work, and what you just created a month ago versus what you created 3 years ago. um, that thing in 3 years ago may have clicked with people and been very successful because just society was calling for that at the time. But the thing that you just created
mm,
that you really love, that you think is even better, might not click so much, and that's not your fault, and that's just the function of producing work that is being released into the public. So there's that aspect of
mm,
it. But then, if we're also talking about a more personal side of somebody realizing maybe that they aren't as good anymore, or why aren't they producing stuff that they're really proud of, I think that takes some soul searching. In that case, maybe it's time to pursue a different medium. Maybe it's time to change paths. It's kind of similar to when I mentioned that I was in film scoring, as that was my career for 10 years. And there came a point where I wasn't frustrated, but I just wasn't satisfied with that, with the work. I could have continued, maybe I would still be in it now, and I'd be miserable, and I'd have alcohol abuse issues or something, which isn't anything to laugh at, but I mean, it's real life. And, but it speaks to the point of, at that point in time, I said, well, I feel like it would be really valuable for me to do some pop music. And so I did this
mm.
pop music album. And then shortly thereafter, I started doing this podcast. So perhaps it's time to change something about where your creativity is being directed, and don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, like Bob Dylan, he didn't care much about the public's opinion. He just changed from a country singer to a rock star. Yeah,
Right, yeah. And sometimes people hate you for it.
I know.
Sometimes they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you sold out," or with a band like Metallica, when they went from their early thrash metal albums to the
Mm.
Black Album, and then in the '90s did the two albums Load and Reload. They're hardcore fans, and maybe even some of the casual fans are like,
Yeah,
"No, what are you doing? You
I
can't
know.
change. You're supposed to stay exactly the same. You're not human."
Yeah. Do you think the tarot card reading also helps you when you are in doubt or you finding your direction?
Oh, that's a fun idea. I mean, in my experience with the tarot, it's perfect for moments where you really need to hear an answer. It's perfect for moments where you're very emotionally tangled up, and you're not sure, you know, what to do, or which direction to go, or what the answer is in a given situation. And this isn't implying that there's some kind of invisible network of forces that cause the tarot to give you the correct answer. Maybe there is, but what the function of what also is happening is that the cards have enough symbolism and narrative in them that the answer that's presented to you when you ask them a specific question like that, your mind and your unconscious is going to find something in there
Mm,
that it needs as an answer, that it's going to find the meaning that it's looking for. And it's often a meaning or an answer that was difficult for you to arrive at logically, with your frontal lobes,
mm.
because it's somewhere in the unconscious. And so the cards will draw out that particular realization, um, through this indirect way.
Yeah, it feels like every time I do the reading or toast the coin to decide something, the moment I do it,
Right.
I've already knew the answer. It's always inside
Oh,
me.
interesting.
Yeah, I feel like I just need someone or something just to confirm my decision is right.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, sometimes we're at a fork in the road, but deep inside,
Mm,
if we were to take a moment and like really kind of push aside the curtains and the bramble, and kind of see ourselves, we know the answer. We know the right answer.
yeah. Have you ever like dreamed of something you can turn that into a song or story or creative idea?
I mean, of course, yeah. If you pay attention to, those moments where your unconscious can seep through a
Mm-hmm.
bit, then everybody has those kinds of things. So like there's these beautiful moments in between when you're waking and sleeping, called the hypnagogic state, which artists like Salvador Dali almost like revered as a source of inspiration. And so in those moments, a lot of things can come through. Some of it is complete nonsense, but then other elements, specifically if you're wrestling with a problem, or have a specific question, something might come to you during that in between state. It could be a fully completed work of art. It could be a melody, could be a piece of music, could be the beginning verse of a poem, and
Mm,
then when you write it down, you realize like, oh, this just it flows into it's a full poem. It just takes a bit of listening and trusting that there's messages coming through. And so, as an example, there have been moments I take a nap
mm,
daily. It was so much so that I've become a biphasic sleeper, where if I have a good night of sleep, if I don't get my 15-minute afternoon nap, I feel like a zombie,
mm,
like my body needs it. But while I'm falling asleep for my nap, occasionally there'll be something that comes to me.
mm,
And so a few times, like one time it was a piece of music, like on the piano, that I'd never heard before. And I thought it was so compelling that I was like, okay, I'll get up a little bit, ruin my falling asleep moment, and I hummed it into my voice memo app as a melody, and then I put the phone down, went back to sleep, and then when I woke up with the alarm, I was like, there was some kind of melody. What was that melody? I couldn't remember it, but I picked up my phone, I listened to it, and I was like, and I went over to the piano, and it became a piece of music. It really did. I end up using it sometimes in the show.
I always feel the nap is such a magic thing. Every time I take a nap afternoon and something just in my mind, it's a lot of creative
Right.
idea, which if I go for sleep in the night, maybe in the morning I couldn't remember anything, but all the ideas like dreams during my nap is so
Mm.
clear. I have no idea why that's
Yeah,
happening.
no, totally. I love naps. I
Yeah.
think everyone in the world should have a siesta, as they call it
Siesta.
in
Yeah.
Spanish, every day, where, yeah, around the time of noon or early afternoon, take a break from work,
Mm-hmm.
take a break from the world, and you take a nap. And I think there's a great function to that in the Western world, we kind of have pushed out the window to our own detriment.
Yeah, in China, when I was in school, and the teacher encouraged us to take a nap. And I heard from my
Mm,
friends working in China, they also have the nap break. So a lot of people
nice.
they have their desk, but there's a hidden bed
Oh,
underneath, so you can just pull out and then have a nap, then come back. It's very good.
yeah, it's a great idea. I think it should come
Mhm.
back. Bring back the naps. That's my um that's the that's also what I'm running on for president. That's my what does it say? My not my standing, but it's my campaign
Yeah,
slogan.
take
Bring
that.
back the naps.
And Tim Ferriss always asks the guest if you have a giant billboard, what message you want to put it on.
Oh,
Yeah, I think that should be.
right. Campaign slogan. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Salvador Dali. I got a tattoo, I think you can see. The Dali's
Oh,
clock.
the clock.
Yeah,
I see it.
yeah.
Yes,
He's a
yes, that's lovely.
very creative person. I wonder what lessons you get from his creative process you can share to my audience.
Yeah, sure. So Salvador Dali is kind of this endlessly entertaining figure in 20th century art history. And in him we see this bizarre dichotomy playing out, which is one, as a brilliant artist, one of the core kind of features of his artwork and his approach is the very high reverence for the unconscious and kind of Freud's view of
Mm.
the psyche. And because of that, he would engage these hypnagogic states we were talking about between waking and sleeping, and try to kind of encourage imagery from that state, from his unconscious, that he would then create into paintings and artworks. And to his credit, I think one of the wisest things he would do is that he would refuse to censor any of that kind of imagery, no matter what it presented to him, and he would just create the artwork fresh and follow that imagery through, even if he didn't understand what it meant. So sometimes, that would result in images that were very sexualized, other images that were very violent, and
Mm.
images, even one that caused him a lot of controversy at the time with the fellow surrealists in Paris. It was a painting he did of Hitler that was, I believe it was. See, this is already a controversial image. It was viewing Hitler from behind, and Hitler was masturbating,
Mhm.
and the fellow surrealists, they were obviously very anti-authoritarian, anti-fascist, and so they said, you cannot paint this, you can't have this anywhere in our galleries. This is sacrilegious to everything we believe in. And then he refused to censor that part of himself, of his unconscious. He said, well, this is my unconscious, and we're all about
Mm.
things from those deep recesses of the brain. So he disagreed with them on that point, and I think that's to his credit. I think he was right on that front. But then this other part of him in this dichotomy is his public persona as this very exaggerated caricature of the artist,
Mhm.
which in many ways led to his success in places like the United States in the 1940s, where like the idea, now that television was around and newspapers were starting to talk gossip and everything, the United States was a place perfectly ready-made for celebrity to kind of blossom forth, and in the 1940s. And so Dali noticed that when he would talk about
Mm.
bizarre things, or when a reporter would ask him, what's the inspiration for this painting, the weirder and the crazier response he had, the more press he would get, the more people would come to his gallery showings. And so it fed him to become this kind of caricature of the creative genius artist, to an extreme, I think. And but the fact that these two dichotomies play out in his story and his character, I think there's a lot to learn from there.
Mm. His story also reminds me of another Italian painter, Caravaggio. He's also very rebel against the traditional way of featuring the Bible stories, and he's very used the new way to do the contrast. I forgot the terminology how to describe his painting,
Oh,
but
chiaroscuro,
yeah,
right?
that's something. Yeah, when I was in
Right, the contrast.
Italy, when I saw his painting, I was just like burst out my tears. It's
Right,
yeah,
intense,
it's
very
very
intense
intense.
visuals.
Yeah, and then when I know his tragic stories, like because he need to flee around the country and live a very poor life.
Yeah, I think we'll do an episode or a series about Caravaggio. Yeah,
Oh, that would be
sounds like
great.
yeah.
That's my way of give you a hint. Please do it.
Right. Right. Yeah, because I've heard a few little passing nuggets about like his life,
Mm,
and thought like, huh, okay, there's something to dig into there. Sounds like he certainly has a good story. with him.
And you did a lot of female artist story, like Emily Dickinson and Maria.
Marina Abramovich, sure, yeah.
Yeah, and then another one who made the very controversial painting.
Was it Leonor Fini?
Maybe.
Perhaps the French,
Yeah.
Italian French
And
artist.
very less unknown from his peers. Yeah, people didn't mention her anymore.
Right. Yeah, she was a contemporary of Salvador Dali, and I would say now, knowing her work closely as I do, I prefer her to Dali in her approach, in just the personality and the person that she was, which we can get into or not. But yeah, no, she was a brilliant mind too. So of course, the idea of this concept of creative genius, it arises in every medium. It's not limited to visual art or writing or filmmaking. It just kind of crops up everywhere. And that's the beauty of, trying to understand what is creative genius, which is, one of the motivations of the show, is that you end up being able to investigate and explore all these diverse mediums. Emily Dickinson wrote poetry. Salvador Dali was specifically a painter. We have Nikola Tesla, who was in electrical engineering. We have, Frida Kahlo was a painter. Then we have someone like Dr. Carl Jung, who was a psychologist. But I think seeing him as a creative genius gives a lot of insight into how he viewed the mind and why.
Yeah, when you're doing all these episodes, one of those figures like inspire your daughter as well. Like, who is she look up to? What she wants to become?
I'll see. I'll talk to her.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
cool.
Maybe it will inspire something. Right now, she's very much into animals because she's in
Ah,
a zoo camp, and so every day it's always something new about animals and all that stuff. So maybe I'll kind of like introduce someone like a Jane Goodall to her,
nice.
to pivot her into a possible idol like you're talking about to have. Yeah.
Okay, I think our time is up. It's very nice to talk with you and ask you so many questions that I have from listening to your shows.
Yeah, Camelia. Oh my goodness, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time and for having such wonderful and thoughtful questions. It's really fun time talking with you.
Thank you.